Hey, good morning to you, and welcome to the Comics Experience Graphic Novel of the Month Club. Even though we're doing this in August, this is actually the July 2024 show. We have got a really good book this month. I really thought that this is just a tremendous piece of work. GRIZ GROBUS by Simon Roy right here. Hello, Simon.
Howdy, Brian.
Yeah, thank you for joining us. I thought this was not just a beautiful piece of work because you're a hell of an artist, but I really like your attention to world building and the thoughtfulness of the worlds that you're creating here.
Well, I appreciate that. That's something I'm obsessive about. So that's it's good that it comes through the work.
Yeah, nice. Well, we'll get into that in a little more, but let me start with I always ask the same first question with every interview. I think it kind of gets to the core of what we're trying to do here. And it's why comics? Of all the things that you could be doing, what is it about comics that speaks to you? And, because comics is an extremely work-intensive, labor-intensive thing. It doesn't necessarily pay amazingly. And you clearly have a lot of talent, and it strikes me that you could be doing almost anything you wanted to with all that talent, and yet you chose comics. So why?
I think it was really like because I grew up drawing all the time and reading comics as well. I got very focused on using comics to I've always been interested in storytelling, so it seemed very natural ever since I was a teenager to try and do comics. And it's just, I don't know, it's kind of too fun in a weird way. I wish it paid a lot better because when I was so for example, when I was a teenager, I started a bunch of comic projects and basically skipped around between scenes that I liked but could never finish anything big because I'd only do the fun scenes, and then all the connective tissue that you need to put it together kind of never got made. But then when I was in college, I was like, okay, I know about this writing thing. I'll try and force some of my friends to write for me. So I tried very hard to force some friends of mine to write for me, and became that annoying client where I don't know what I want, but I know this isn't it. That kind of thing where they'd be like this, and I'd be like, no, that's not quite it. Then I realized, okay, well, I have to write it myself now too. So then I slowly kind of embraced learning how to write stuff too over the past 15 years, and I've been kind of doing that ever since. And yeah, and also in terms of doing other stuff, I do work in video games a lot of the time. So kind of half my income is video games, and then the other half is comic books. So,
okay.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I can't do all comics, even though I'd really like to. But
sure. Yeah, no, I mean it's good to have a day job, as it were. I didn't know you did video games. What anything that we would know that you worked on?
The one that I worked on the longest, or I worked on two of these. They're these very dense role playing. I don't know if I'd even say role playing. They're kind of if you remember Oregon Trail.
Yeah.
These games are kind of like a very complicated Bronze Age fantasy Oregon Trail sort of thing. And they're called they're successor games to one from the late 90s, I think, called King of Dragon Pass or Kings of Dragon Pass. And these are 6 Ages and 6 Ages Lights Go Out, I think it's called. And so basically, for those, I did a little bit of concept work and a lot of illustration, because it's basically you have in these games you have screens where you're kind of managing how many bulls do we want to sacrifice to this god, how many men do we want to send to this as a trade delegation, and then as you go through the seasons, you'll get events, and for those events, illustrations will pop up. So I was one of the artists doing illustrations for that. And then I've also done more work for small studios that have not released their games yet. So that's also
Yeah. In terms of working, do you enjoy sort of the comics focus of like where you're mostly working by yourself versus working in a team like you have to when you're doing a video game project?
there's I mean I think I've been kind of spoiled by doing so much stuff by myself. Um, so I have like recently I was working on a video game job where I was a member of a team. Um, and it depends on what your role is because I had an animation job of like I don't know 2018 something like that where I was just a cog in the machine. I was drawing scenes for the backgrounds of the Netflix Captain Underpants show. You know, and in that case, you're given reference, you sit down, you're given your scenes for the week. You do that, you show your boss. He does the corrections to make sure you get the style proper. You know, that's like pretty. That's comparatively easy because you just put your helmet on, you obey orders. You look out of the slit in the bunker.
Yeah.
But I don't know. Also, because a lot of the time too, working on comics, I've worked with um, collaborators, especially in the writing
Sure.
phase. So like in GRIZ GROBUS too, Jess Pollard, who's a storyboard artist in Vancouver, she helped me with the writing process throughout making the book, and that was like a hugely fun thing. And like with like I've in other comics that I've worked on, um, like I co-wrote a book called First Knife that Artyom Trakhanov, a Russian artist, drew. And I co-wrote it with my friend Daniel Benson, who's an American living in Bulgaria. Um, and that's very fun because then you're just like tossing around ideas, passing scripts back and forth.
Yeah,
And I
yeah.
find that I find that easier and funner than um, some sort of like standard team based jobs, I guess.
Sure. Yeah, yeah. I first encountered your artwork, though obviously you had done stuff before, but the first time I encountered it was on Profit, and I was very impressed with your style, and again the world building there too. Because were you a Rob Liefeld fan when you were a kid?
Uh, that's funny though because I remember when I was a teenager, um, there was a guy who started a comic book store in the strip mall near my high school, like in the small town that I lived in. Um, and he came from another. There's a big comic store in Victoria that collapsed, and he took a bunch of the back stock and started his own store because he was an employee. And so, as part of his bargain bin, he had a ton of Transmetropolitan, which I bought and loved the hell out of. But there was also tons of that early '90s Image and Extreme Studio stuff. So like, I actually did have either me or my older brother bought a copy of the first Prophet, um, as well as like Shadowhawk and stuff like that,
Yeah.
and some Youngblood. Um, and aside from the early '90s Super Patriot, which was drawn incredibly well, I was not a fan.
Huh.
I didn't like any of that stuff. I won't be too negatively effusive about it, but I was just like it didn't appeal to me, you know. Um, but yeah, we got hired to work on Profit. The cool thing that Liefeld did was he was just like, "Oh yeah, carte blanche. I don't care what you guys do. As long as I'm getting royalties, I'm fine." And so,
Yeah.
thusly, we got to just make a deranged Conan in space.
Yeah.
And also like that was a great working on a team experience. So like working with Brandon Graham, getting to
Yeah.
do a bit of co-writing with him, getting to direct um, other artists at times too. It was a very awesome first project to get into the business with.
Yeah, yeah, I would have thought so because it came across on the page, and you know, I mean, I own a comic book store. I'm here in a comic book store, but we don't sell a lot of, you know, Rob Liefeld extreme style comics, but we sold the shit out of Profit because people could see that it was its own voice, it was its own tone. Yeah, it worked really, really well, I thought. So
Well, I'm glad you enjoyed it because also too, like, as a side note, uh, two of my other books, Habitat and GRIZ GROBUS, kind
yeah,
of came out of working on Profit. Like Habitat came directly because I was like, oh man, it'd be fun to do a Conan style barbarian adventure on a big derelict space station. That'd be awesome. And then for GRIZ GROBUS too, there was the story that will become GRIZ GROBUS went through a few iterations, and one of the iterations was me trying to tell that first part of the story, the Father Stanley waking up bit, um, in a Prophet setting, except with Father Stanley as like an evil war robot. You know, an evil Earth Empire death robot that's being worshipped by a cult of aliens who are living in their like crashed slave ship for generations or something like that. You know, some Prophet bullshit like that. You know?
yeah, neat. Well, let's get back to that in a second. I want to talk a little more about your early sort of process and path. You mentioned as a teenager you were drawing scenes, at least, maybe not a full comic. What was the first full comic that you drew?
The first, I did a bunch of short comics in college because once I committed to doing things myself, I did a bunch of little like little short comics to kind of like learn, get comfortable with the combination of writing and drawing together. But my first complete thing was Yan's Atomic Heart, which was printed in 2009
Okay.
by a small Canadian press called New Reliable Press, run by that was my friend Ed Brisson,
Yeah.
who now writes for Marvel and DC and all that. And he's quite the accomplished writer now. But back when I met him, he'd been sweating away trying to get into comics. Like he was lettering. I think he was paying for his publishing projects by lettering manga, usually like boys romance manga,
Right.
yaoi or whatever. So
Uh-huh.
he worked. I think it was like he was working for the government, and then his side hustle was lettering manga, then using the money from that to print books that he thought was cool. So we met on a forum initially, and then um, he liked the story, and eventually he published it. And then in 2014, I republished it with Image Comics with a bunch of the other short stories that I did
Yep.
throughout college.
Mhm.
So yeah, that was my first kind of foray into the
So
comics
kind of
world.
like 15 years ago or so, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. And actually, when the New Reliable Press version of Yan's Atomic Heart came out, it was at a time when Diamond was they're changing the minimums, I think. So it was like if you didn't sell 1,000 copies, they wouldn't bother delivering it, and they
Yeah.
wouldn't list it again.
Yeah.
And we did not sell that many. I think we sold like 700 or something like that. And but the Diamond rep was just like, yeah, that's fine. We'll let it slide. So just snuck in right under the wire.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, you know, I mean, Diamond got a lot of shit for a lot of years from a lot of people, but and some of it admittedly deserved. But I would say, from my side of the counter, they did recognize things that actually were comics art and good, as opposed to things that are, you know, like someone trying to do a movie pitch for Chief or whatever, and they
yeah.
would make a distinction between those two things, and they would treat the comics people better. That was always my sense. It's
Yeah.
good to hear that confirmation from your end as well.
What I've it's funny because talking with some local Canadian store owners up here too, they like everyone likes to complain about Diamond a lot because they were like the big boogeyman, you know. And then,
Sure.
but now that like apparently there's some difficulty too in um, shipping comics through the new distribution systems, getting them into Canada without uh, totally getting screwed over by all the shipping and import brokerage fees and all that stuff. That like Diamond had a system. There was no, you know, they had their problems, but they tried like in the pandemic they got caught in a crisis, but they also like tried to make it work quite
Yep.
quite carefully. And so now for I know for some Canadian shops, they're just to getting the distribution figured out is now a serious problem, and they're like, you know, they're wistful for the days where it was just a simple monopoly. You
Yeah.
know,
No, I mean,
which is
look, even
great.
as an American store, I feel that same way. I really wish in many ways that I didn't have to do business with Lunar, you know,
Yeah,
who's exclusive distributor now. I mean, they're discount comic book services. I think that they're a plague upon this industry. But you know, I have no choice, right? If I want to sell Image Comics, I must give them money, and it's a very frustrating place to be in, you know. But you know, again, I'm sure that that Eric Stevenson would tell us all kinds of horror stories about Diamond. You know,
I'm sure. Well, exactly. Everybody was making the right decision for them at the time, or that's, you know,
absolutely, no, 100%,
it's like a Miyazaki movie where everyone's like, you know, they're motivated by their own
Yeah.
complicated but reasonable motivations. You know, there's no
Yeah.
villains here. If you really
Yeah,
dig under the
I think
surface,
the real trick for a comic book store, right, is that periodical comics are no longer a moneymaker because of all these changes, right? Because
yeah,
of all the labor that we have to, you know, we've got 3 different sources that we've got to buy from, and each one works differently than the other one. So you can't streamline the work like you used to. You have to kind of reinvent your work every single time, and it's just such a time suck. That it takes away from the profitability of the periodical. And I think the periodical ultimately is really the center of comics, and you know how you make them and pay for them. Though, you know, you kickstarted this book. We'll have that conversation in a couple minutes probably.
yeah. I'd love to talk about the Kickstarter angle too. Yeah,
Yeah,
the
but
difference.
let's. I'm not controlling this interview at all. Let's just go on all over. But so what I wanted to ask is, did you go to school specifically to study art?
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
So I went to school in Calgary, Alberta, in the where the Great Plains meet the Rockies in Canada, because it was of the options for like prestigious uh, art schools in Canada. There's a few. There's like 4, I think, if I remember correctly. Um, and the one in Alberta, ACAD, has a different name now, but they had the most. They're the most technical minded because lots of places like uh, as they get more, you know, they kind of get caught into more like postmodern art theory and less about like forcing you to learn to draw better, you know, because like, you know, it's because art schools are all staffed by largely people who've graduated from art schools. It's like this like uh, you know, simulation of a simulation or simulacra of a, you know, like there's these strange layers of hiring and internal logic to art schools that means that if you want to do, yeah, like technical design and drawing and stuff like that, sometimes I think it's hard to find your way into that. So like at the time, you know, almost, yeah, about 15 years ago, ACAD had this really harsh design program that had illustration streams to it. So they had uh, all these exhaustive technical courses that were like derived from like their 70s practice. So you'd be like, mix your own black and then hand paint, 50 shades of gradation along this scale, and then design several compositions using these paints you've mixed, and then also, use shades of gray, white to black paper, precisely cut them, and you're basically like making precise cut paper designs, where it's all this stuff basically trying to reinforce ideas of craft and stuff like that. That at the time we're all like, this is fucking bullshit, man. This is so this is completely irrelevant, but it was it was instructive, and like the people in charge of it, a couple of them were famously like very harsh, fascistic, you do it
Sure.
perfectly or you fail sort of thing, and which meant that like you'd have people who would be basically sitting around the equivalent of first year art school for like 2 or 3 years until they got up to the skill level to get into the design program. So like if you got into the design program, you had you felt a certain sort of prestige, even though you were much less social and usually less cool than like a painting major or something like
Right.
that. Because you're just like, I'm obsessively becoming the best at my art, and also, yeah, we don't really have cool parties. There's no our department is not the cool party department.
Right.
But that kind of that suited me at the time, because like I first year art school was funny for me, because I think art schools make most of their money off the first years, because people go in there not really 2/3 of people go in there not really knowing what they want to do, and a huge proportion don't come back for the second year because they're like, art school not for me. And then so like I was surrounded by a lot of people. I was expecting that like first year everyone's into drawing just like me. We're all going to be on the same page, and just like being in tons of classes where people couldn't draw or paint, and I was just like, what is this joke? What the hell's going on here? I thought we were all on the same page. And like
Right.
instructors, there's one painting instructor who, well, when he introduced the class, he's like, I'm not here to teach you how to paint. I'm here to teach you how to teach yourself how to paint. And I was like, no, please teach me how to paint. That's what I'd like to learn. So, but yeah, so it basically then second year to fourth year involved specializing more and more towards specifically illustration and concept art. So doing projects that were more and more tailored to that.
And was there a comics track at all, or was it just a general illustration?
It was more, there were some comic projects, and they brought in there were some local comics people, like the artist Riley Rossmo. He I think he still lives in Calgary, but at the time he would come in and help teach the comic assignments. So there was like some of I have a book that came out in 2014 called Tiger Lung that I made parts of with my buddy Jason Wordy, who's went to school with me and is like a colorist for a million projects nowadays. And one of the two parts of that book, maybe 3 parts of that book, came from like we managed to hijack projects for our class curriculum and make stories for that would become this book, Tiger Lung, which is a fun shamanic adventure set in the Paleolithic, and you might not be able to find a copy because I think it's out of print now. But it is a cool book if you can find a secondhand copy of it.
Nice. So your instructors were positive about comics, though. They weren't dismissive of it.
They were generally not dismissive of it, because there was a lot of, there's like different cadres, I guess, in the design teachers, because like some of them read comics, or at the very least were open to it and interested, and others didn't really know anything about it, but were also encouraging, because they'd been told that comics were a thing, and even though they made their bread and butter doing like illustrations for the annual report of like a big a big Albertan oil company or something like that, or doing watercolor wildlife paintings for Parks Canada or something like that. They could still, they were still, they didn't, nobody really poo-pooed comics, which was good. Because I know that's often has not been the case.
Sure.
But yeah, there was funny times too though with teachers that like one wonderful teacher who was in charge of one of the big comic projects. He had never read any comics, and he also didn't seem to read very many movies or watch very many movies. So he would always end up just like referencing one or two Scorsese movies when he was trying to talk about anything to do with visual storytelling at all, which
Sure.
always kind of cracked me up. It always came back to Raging Bull, but
Yeah. So, so it sounds like you didn't really gonna get any formal education about the storytelling aspect of it. Because comics are kind of their own language, right? Like in terms of deciding what image to show and what not. I mean, you can compare it to movies, certainly, but it's nowhere near a one-on-one thing because of the way that time works in comics. Time in a movie is almost always linear and forward, but time in comics can be whatever you choose and whatever the audience does. I mean, one of the things I often say is comics are one of those rare mediums that it's really common to like you're reading and then you go, wait a minute, let me go back 3 pages and look at that again. Did that just come naturally to you, or was that something that you developed over a period of time?
I think that was definitely something developed over a period of time. Just through practice, just through wanting to do it, and also I don't know. A funny thought was like also when I was a teenager, when I started to get serious about doing comics, part of it was just finding lots of contemporary and old comics and um, in a way being inspired by how many of them were terrible. Because it was like I was just like reading a lots of the time. I remember reading, this would be like 2005 maybe, reading like a really well drawn but stupidly written new comic and being like, I could at least write something that good. I think if I really put my mind to it. So in a weird way, like I don't know, low expectations helped encourage me to actually get into it. But yeah, no real formal training in actually how to make or pace or doing that. Just lots of practice, I think.
Yeah, when I looked at your wiki page, there was an awful lot of short one-off projects. Some stuff for 2000 AD. Those were like probably 16-page stories or something like that. Can you sort of compare the experience working on those short form projects versus let's go to Prophet, probably because that became the long body of work that was your first big long thing where it had to come out on a regular basis, so you had to learn kind of 2 lessons at once. Yeah, does that make sense?
Definitely, because like, though I mean I think there's a lot of crossover between the two, because one of the reasons that Prophet kind of adapted into that rotating cast of artists was to make it so everybody could hit the deadlines and basically just like to prevent us from getting into too much trouble trying to get everything finished on time. Because it lent itself, so then so there's kind of a nice feedback loop with that too, where because like initially working on the first 3 issues of Prophet, I think I went and visited Brandon and we talked about what they were going to be, and then I went back to Calgary and drew a bunch of them, and my buddy Richard Ballerman, who was in the same cohort as me, he colored the first 3 issues. So like we had like this big long stretch of time to work on the first 3 issues of this big sustained thing. And then those issues were published, and then we kind of had to hit the ground running and pick up new chunks of the story and rush to finish them and do that sort of thing. So, but there was a lot of there was always a kind of a lot of smaller self-contained chunks. So I think that's also informed a lot how I have worked since then. It's like thinking of breaking things into like nice discrete chunks instead of maybe thinking holistically of the entire giant project.
Yeah.
So like GRIZ GROBUS was like written in chunks basically, and I think it kind of reads like that, hopefully in a good way, because it was completed chapter and short story at a time until it kind of accumulated into a larger thing. So it wasn't until, I don't know, like halfway through that we kind of knew the full shape of what everything was going to look like. Kind of slowly came together, which I find is a very good way to keep things fresh and keep yourself from getting bored. Which I feel like is a big danger for anybody doing like long sustained creative projects. There's the risk that like if you plan it out too meticulously, you kind of risk getting bored trying to enact the whole thing.
Sure.
So purposefully structuring things to not be purposefully structuring things to be kind of like shorter and self-contained, so you kind of get the pleasure really of like completing a part of it, and then having that as a nice discrete thing, and then you can move on to the next part, fully explore it, finish it, package it up, rather than just kind of like grinding away on an endless 400-page epic, which if you can do that, that's very cool. But I don't think that I can handle that.
Yeah. In addition to this graphic novel club, which is aimed at adults, we also have one that's aimed at kids. So I talked to an awful lot of kids authors, and a large number of them are like literally fresh out of school. Like they're recruited the day they graduate and given a contract to create a 200-page book. And I always find that fascinating because how do you know how to create a 200-page book until you've done a whole lot of 8-page stories, right? To sort of see how it flows and how it ebbs, and then the execution of that, where if you're doing it for a mainstream book publisher, which most of these kids straight out of school are doing, they want to see the whole thing before they sign off for you to do the next step. So you've got to go and you've got to thumbnail your entire book, and then you've got to pencil your entire book, and then you've got to ink your entire book. And I find that that's one of the things that I hear that's very hard for most of those guys, is sort of sustaining their interest all the way through each of the discrete steps, whereas if you're doing it in short story forms, you can jump back and forth a lot more, as you're creating.
Yeah, which is a very like I know some people that work in the same. I mean, also their books are signed up with big bookstore publishers too, but like who do that same very meticulous iterative process where they do the entire thing, and that's I just don't think I have the attention span. But also too, like, so GRIZ GROBUS and all the stuff I've been doing in the past couple of years, or I guess 5 years, when I've been building these things, has been kind of based around doing it initially for Patreon. So it's just kind of like however many pages I can get done in a month. So like half of a 30-page story or a discrete 11-page story or something like that, which has really just landed perfectly in my brain as like the optimum for me method of getting stuff accomplished. Which, I mean, as I'm sure most people who've done artistic things know, it's like the toughest thing is just doing the thing. You know, like everyone's got a ton of cool ideas, but you know, the gulf between that perfect idea in your head and actually having a thing in your hands that you've finished and that you can show to people and you can yeah, show to people at least. Ideally you make money, but you probably, you know, you might not. That's not the important part.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I feel pretty good about, even though it's not necessarily the most lucrative system. Actually, but it's getting better because basically, yeah, like I make the stories chunk at a time for my Patreon audience, which is you know, people are coming and going every month, but it's a pretty static, constant, like 200-ish people for a variety of tiers that um, makes enough money for me to justify doing it month to month. And then with a Kickstarter, I can actually make a real chunk of money and print a book and distribute it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Which is becoming more of a real thing, even though every single Kickstarter feels like a experiment, I guess.
Sure. Well, I mean, I mean, it strikes me that you end up starting again and again with
Yeah,
Kickstarter, right? Like, and just because your last project worked doesn't mean that the next project will. Um, I think it might be easier for an artist like you who has kind of a vibe that they do.
yeah,
But I certainly know some people who, you know, who did really well with their first Kickstarter and then were shocked that their second Kickstarter wasn't as big. You know, they're like, well, wait a
yeah,
minute, what? It's still me, you know.
yeah. And like doing there's something with Kickstarters too where you get like diminishing returns with you know, if you're doing it, if you have like if you're trying to fund a big epic, then your issue 2 or your volume 2 on Kickstarter, it might be harder to catch as many people. Whereas like I've been doing follow-up stories to GRIZ GROBUS basically, but they're not like what the one I did one in the summertime for a book called Refugium, which is technically a sequel to GRIZ GROBUS, but also is a standalone adventure. So with all of those and that looking at the statistics, like of the 900 and something people who paid money into the Kickstarter, half of them were returning people, but then the other half were new people altogether. So
Yeah,
if I can catch, you know, if I can catch a percentage of the maybe 1,800 people that have now at some point in their lives paid money into one of my Kickstarters, um, and then catch new people as well,
yeah,
then potentially, you know, then that might be a workable thing for as long as I have the energy to try and do that kind
sure,
of thing, right?
sure.
But
I mean, since you seem willing to talk about numbers, and as soon as you don't want to, that's fine.
yeah,
Uh, 200 Patreon people, let's say 900 Kickstarters. What did the actual print run of the image edition of this end up at?
um, the initial sales were not enough to pay for the print run. So like the first
They weren't.
pre-order,
Okay. Okay.
but I kind of pushed to print 4,000 so that there will be like at the very least, in my mind, I'm like I want to have stock in the future, so I'm gonna really push for them to uh, print extra, just because like you know over a book's like 10-year lifespan or longer, you know,
Yeah.
I can probably move a lot of those books over, you know, by myself if need be. But
Yeah.
because like with the so example for the first
I mean, I would hope you'd be going back to press at some point in 10 years.
ideally, right? Like because actually yeah, like Habitat uh did pretty well because they had to print a second they had to do a second printing of Habitat.
Yep.
Um which is now but that was also because we got it into one of those. It was like a comic loot crate. That was a thing at the time that no longer exists. Um, so it was like 2,000 copies bought at cost right off the bat. You know,
Yeah.
took a huge chunk out of the print run,
Yeah.
and then prompted them to print more. But yeah, I don't know. The two systems are interesting because like in my mind, for the consumer, the direct market is definitely better because like all the transport costs are built into the whole system. You know,
Yep.
as I mean, yeah, you obviously know this, but I'm just thinking for like the average viewer, it's like the distributor sells the book, or rather, the publisher sells the book to the distributor for such and such a reduced amount of money. The distributor sells it to the store for that for another smaller fee, and then finally the bookstore sells at the sticker price. So everybody's broken down that sticker price into chunks of who gets what,
Yep.
which is really good for the consumer. But for the Kickstarter, um, the sticker price, like it's way better for me as a producer of books to do a Kickstarter because more, you know, shipping is charged on top of the sticker price. So the sticker price can go right into paying off, you know, the collaborators on the book, the print costs, all that. Um, and then the shipping is its own separate beast altogether. So with, a much smaller amount of people, you can actually make a book that pays for itself and maybe even makes a profit
Yeah.
with way fewer people than doing things through the extended bookstore market.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would counter argue that you're then limited to the audience that you yourself are able to hustle up,
Definitely.
um, which is not most creators' greatest strength, right? Is hustling up an audience because
It's
they're
hard work.
focused on making the art, right? And I think what happens in a store like ours is you get that discoverability. People walk in off the street who probably haven't heard of you, honestly, Simon.
Yeah. No.
And or anybody in the store, and they see the cover and they go, "What is this? Let me look at this. Oh wow, that's really cool. I'm going to buy this." That doesn't happen in Patreon. That doesn't happen in Kickstarter. They're essential parts of the ecosystem. I understand that, but I think that for a lot of creators, it ends up being a very limiting, like they limit their audience and then they can't take it broader after that because if you sold to your super fans already, who else is there to sell it to?
This is a real problem. Yeah. No, because it is like you're cultivating like a little, digital fiefdom of people that are interested in your work. But because like I mean, in an ideal world, the direct market would be, or really, I mean, because like there's stores like that. Basically, it's like there's cool comic book stores, and then there's
Mhm.
also just like many cautious comic book stores.
Yep.
And
Yep.
so the big thing for me, where it's like there are some comic book fans who know who I am, and luckily some of them
I
will
didn't mean
become.
that in a hostile way. You understand? That was
No,
not.
no,
That,
no. This is I totally, because this is, I do think about this too, because like because like it is way harder to it's way harder to drive everything yourself, um, doing Kickstarter. So like it is more profitable, but everything is a little risky because you are coming back with your hat in hand to the same group of people every time. So you're kind of you're making yourself much more beholden to the goodwill of people and like hoping that they actually like the work well enough to keep coming back every year or so. Whereas if you're participating in a healthy direct market, um, ordinary people can come on off the street and maybe see a book and maybe buy it and maybe like it. But for that to work, you kind of need to have uh, a system healthy enough where your publisher gets the word out properly. Store owners can be convinced to carry the book.
yep.
Um,
Yep.
you know, like all the stuff with people online always pushing like the final order cutoff is at this time, and like as a reader, and like me personally as a reader, it's like I don't often follow up on the call for final order cutoff. Like I don't go to
Sure.
my local store and
Sure.
be like, oh my god, guys, it's almost April 1st. We gotta order. It's
Yep.
usually like I'll remember after the fact and be like, can you order in a copy of this? And they'll be like, probably. And then in a week or two, you know, I'll get a call or an email or something about it. But um, yeah, it's
Yeah,
just
no, I
it's
mean, unfortunately, the direct market itself has broken big chunks of the direct market. You know, the direct
yeah,
market worked really, really well when, you know, Marvel didn't publish more than say 10 comics a month. Sorry, a week. Now they're publishing 18 comics a week, and that's not just 18 comics a week. That each of those comics has 3 to 5 variant covers. So they're they're publishing, 50 individual SKUs every week that the system somehow has to absorb, and it's really tricky and problematic. The insane part to me is I strongly feel like if there were 2 Spider-Man comics a month rather than 12 or whatever there are, Spider-Man would sell so much better.
yeah,
I absolutely believe it. They would sell hundreds of thousands of copies of that, but that the audience looks at it and goes, I can't parse the difference between this Spider-Man and that Spider-Man and that Spider-Man. And so, you know what? I'm just not going to buy any of them instead. And it's a really weird place that we've gotten ourselves into. I mentioned earlier that periodical comics are essentially not profitable anymore for a direct market store. They used to be the core of everything that we did, right? Like it used to, when I opened my store back in 1989, it was impossible not to make money selling comics, periodical comics, because you could buy 200 copies of X-Men, and if you only sold 100 of them, well, you'd sell the other 100 in the next 6 months as a back issue,
yeah.
and you raise the price by a quarter, and so it all worked out. But now nobody wants to buy back issues anymore because every single week there's 50 new Marvel comics that are hitting the shelf, and there's 40 DC comics, and there's 25 Image comics. And Image to me is the most. It's not frustrating, right? But Image really tries to break new talent. It tries to break new storytelling conventions and genres. And if you're not able to properly market them and support them, it becomes much less for everybody.
yeah. The actually getting that's like the yeah, maybe I won't complain too much about it, but like working with companies that are actually willing to put in the extra effort to promote things properly is very difficult. I would say that's the
Yeah,
I won't complain too much, but because yeah,
yeah,
like 'cause there's a lot of outreach that kind of has to be done by these companies, and a lot of the time they just don't, which is very frustrating when you are like, especially like, I mean, not just when I was starting out, but like now too. It's always a struggle to get, the beleaguered public relations people at a company to actually set aside the time to,
sure.
earn that chunk of money that they're getting paid technically for my book, but also your one book of 50 that they
Right.
don't necessarily care about because it's their job. They show up every day. They're sending out the same press releases. It's
Yeah.
very impersonal, but
Yeah, and I think it gets tricky for someone at your stage of your career where you're a known quantity,
yeah,
relatively speaking, right? And so it's perhaps hard for them to find a new angle to go, well, here's why GRIZ GROBUS is good. If me as a store has already decided on what my Simon Roy audience is, how do you crack that?
yeah,
If that
yeah,
makes sense,
yeah. And do you crack it? Well, time will tell. That's really
yeah, yeah. But yeah, I mean, I saw the work and I was like, well, this is great. We're gonna push this as hard as we can, you know. And so it comes down to individual retailers having to make individual decisions, which is, you know, on paper sounds okay, but in reality probably is no longer works because again, we're all overworked at this point. We're all overworked. Too many comics coming out. You know, it's just it's really hard.
Yeah, well, I think you describing like just the landscape of all the DC and Marvel stuff kind of sums it up. Well, because actually, I mean, coming back to what I was saying about like the the precarious nature of trying coming back with your hat in hand and the same people for Kickstarter every time. It's like I feel like that's a different version of that. I mean, a more maybe predatory version of that is happening with like Marvel and DC, where they're kind of like we know we got these people that'll buy these books, you know.
Yeah.
Let's just try and sell them way more books. You know,
Yeah.
we've got them. We got to squeeze all the blood we can out of this. You know,
Yep.
instead of I don't know, yeah, trying to bring more people in. I don't know, you know, how can you as a company be like, can we compete with, you know, TikTok? Nah, I guess we'll just try and squeeze the same, you know,
Sure.
25 to
Sure.
50-year-old men for
Yeah.
their pocket.
And you know, and with Marvel and DC in particular, you know, they've got corporate masters, right? And
Yeah.
they've got people who are above them who don't actually give a shit about comics, who really could not care less about comics. All they care about is, are you making a profit? You know,
Yeah.
And is your profit bigger than it was last quarter? And that's it. That's all they care about. And so there's people at both of those companies who love comics. They love comics more than anything. But they have to change what they do and the way they do it, you know, because they've got to make more of a profit this quarter than they did last quarter. You know,
Yeah.
and it's
They got
just
the variance.
this is the thing that's beautiful about Image is that that's not a problem for Image. You know,
Yeah.
that's not what their concern is. Their concern is really trying to publish the best genre comics that they can. You know, even if some of them don't make money. You know.
Yeah. And they're structured in such a way that they're not really going to lose much money, which is kind of it's
Yeah.
good for them.
Yeah.
But I do feel like in a way it's like maybe if they the thing is that like you know like Skybound and the other guys like they have a bit more skin in the game, as it would say. So like if they commit to making your book, they're paying you a decent page rate. They're paying you a competitive page rate. But
Yeah.
that also means that they're investing a chunk of cash into you that they need to get back. So they're then gonna put in even more money to promote it and properly get it moving. Whereas you know, Image is they like facilitate getting your book out, but they're not necessarily sweating the small stuff
Yeah.
in the same way.
So with GRIZ, was it a foregone conclusion that you were going to go with Image, or did you shop it around to other publishers to see what the interest was?
I shopped it around first and to different publishers and got pretty far with one in particular. Actually, yeah, because I think the people I got pretty far with Oni, and they offered what to me at the time I was like, yeah, that's a decent sounding advance given that I've already drawn all this. But this was like 2020, I think, when they were talking to them, when I was talking to them, and they were very keen on. I basically presented the finished book to them, and they were very keen on editing it. Maybe not a lot, but enough that I was kind of tired from finishing the book already. And so they're like, yeah, we could do this. We could pay you some money, but we do have to change a bunch of stuff about it. And I was just like, that really stuck with me at the time because you know, like everybody's isolated, everybody's going crazy, and I'm like, maybe I don't want to change this now that I've just finished all of it.
Sure.
And I talked to some other publishers too who did not offer nearly as good a advance as Oni did. But yeah, I just ended up going with Image. So I'm like, well, all my other books have come out through Image. So I would assume, in my mind, I was like, I assume it's going to be easier for retailers to order more of my other books as well if they're all ordering from Image at the same time. And I am on speaking terms with the boss man there. I can, sometimes get him on the phone or whatever. So I'm like, okay, I'll do it there. That'll work. But that was also too after talking to all the publishers and doing a Kickstarter and making money off that. And then I was like, then I presented a copy of the book and I was like, would you guys want to print a soft cover of this?
Yeah.
So it was like I bounced around a few different directions before going with Image, which was this is all right. It's all right.
Yeah. Well, I mean, for what it's worth, I find them very easy to work with when we do this book club stuff.
No, definitely, they're good. I don't
really,
want to.
Yeah.
I don't want to give too much of a. I don't give a bad impression because they are.
Yeah, no, I don't think anyone took it that way. I just sort of stating it for the record for all of us. Yeah, we're on the same page here, I think, man. It's a hard business. They're a good partner, but it's a hard business.
Exactly. That's the best way to put it.
Yeah. Cool. Well, let's talk about craft a little bit. I mean, I cannot believe we've already been speaking for an hour, man.
We got really sidetracked on comics, the business, which is fun because I haven't talked to anybody about it in a little while. So getting to stretch those muscles is nice. But
yeah. But yeah, let's talk about craft a bit. I suppose the first question is, do you work digital? Do you work physical? What's your overall process?
I do both. For GRIZ GROBUS, I drew a lot of it. Like I drew the first few stories with like the classic metal nib and inkwell on Bristol board. And then I shifted to using these. Actually, do I have one here? I don't. Using these like disposable Japanese zebra felt tip little markers, which I'm currently using. But then like for some of this, for the book that I just did a Kickstarter for, Refugium, I drew most of that all digital on a Cintiq. So like the Cintiq is definitely the most efficient way to do it. But I've traditionally been like an ink and paper man, and I'm going back to that to basically to have originals that I can sell and in that way too. And also it's kind of more satisfying to have a stack of pages finished beside you than just like, look at that folder on my computer. What a full folder, It's not the same.
What about the what would you call it? Sort of the haptic feedback of drawing, like, because I've had some people tell me that they really enjoy dragging that pen or pencil across the piece of paper and feeling it as they do it.
I think that for the longest time, when I was using the metal nib, that was the things that really got me too. Because like with the metal nib, you're scraping a trench and dumping ink onto the paper in that way, and that is really fun. But then also too, like part of why I stopped doing that is, there would always be loose ink. Passing from the inkwell to the other part of the page, moving your hand over a little patch of ink that actually hadn't quite dried yet. And you didn't spot it in the light in the right way.
Right.
In a way that the different ways I work now are less susceptible to smears and befuddlement. I mean, it still all looks exactly the same, which is kind of funny, but I do like. I don't know. I feel like the physicality is just more satisfying. That's like the big takeaway.
Yeah. I mean, it's especially if it's designed to be printed in a physical book, having that physicality of the page as well, I think is important and key. And like you noted, being able to sell your original artwork becomes a whole additional venue for that you can make money doing.
Yeah, so it's another few $1,000 that might help
Yep.
you know, might help in a pinch, might actually, be another 3 months of retirement, one day in the far future.
Yeah. 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 Well, I mean, I always think that ultimately your hope is that you end up with 15, 20 books on your schedule, on your bookshelf at the end, and then you're generating money from them, for the next 50 years. That's the dream. That to me is the dream. So
Yeah, the passive income, dream. That's really
exactly right. Yeah. So you mentioned at the top writing a script. How intensive is your script since you're writing it essentially for yourself? Is it screenplay style? Is it more page one? These kind of things happen.
it's usually pretty specific, but it's not necessarily that detailed. Because like I'll have I'll have all the things that need to happen on the page in the script, but I won't necessarily get that detailed on what it all is going to look like and how it's staged and all that. Because because I'm doing it for me, it's like I'm going to work that out as I go, um, which has been interesting too. Because like I've been writing for some of my friends recently, and often because of that, I will also end up, just for my own edification, I guess, and to have more control over the process, I'll also end up drawing layouts and sending them layouts as well. So like I'll write a loose script, and then I'll be like, well, maybe this isn't actually enough for them to work off of. And then I'll send layouts, and then they can like change the layouts and do whatever they want with them. But
Yeah.
it still has a bit of that like directorial control in it, which I like. Yeah, I know it's a fun process. Yeah, go ahead.
Do you do those kind of thumbnails for yourself as you're writing,
Usually,
or is it all living in your head? And
usually I'll write the script out for like the iteration is I don't know, pretty simple. Like I'll do an outline of like what's the idea of the story, and then I'll write a few iterations or I'll write a few drafts basically until it's in a shape that I want, and then usually I'll do layouts from that. And then if I'm working on the Cintiq, it's kind of perfect because you do a little tiny thumbnail, and then you just scale it up and draw your pencils, and then you do your final pass of inks. But sometimes too, I've just been skipping the layout phase altogether, because the scripts are light enough that there's usually not more than 5 panels per page. So in my mind, that kind of like and I leave lots of room for like if there's a big moment, even in the script, I'll be like, well, that's going to be 2/3 of the page, that one panel. So so usually I can skip layouts for myself, but that's kind of like one of the funnest parts of making a comic for me is like that is bridging the gap between the script and the comic art itself. Is like the layout where you're actually figuring out the storytelling is one of the funnest parts for me.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. How long does it take you to lay out a story? Though obviously you're working at different lengths of stories, but are you doing like 2 or 3 pages of layout a day? More than that? Less than that?
I would say like often it'll just be 2 or 3, but if on a good day I can do, I don't know, like 10 pages of layouts or something. Like if I'm really in the zone.
Yeah.
Because it's not. Yeah, I feel like the way I work, it'll be like bursts of productivity, and then like a little bit of a fallow period, and then a burst of high productivity. So it's not like necessarily a sustained, 15 pages a week, blah 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 kind of thing. It's more, lots of little sprints of activity.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And how about when you get into the actual penciling stage? Are you doing a page a day or more, less?
Right now, I've been drawing like for all the GRIZ GROBUS stuff because it's a little bit smaller than regular comic size.
Yeah.
I'm drawing it not too like it's larger than print size, but it's not. It's closer to like 8.5 by 11
Okay.
size. So it's purposely like I've kind of like designed this workflow to be faster, so I can usually pencil like I don't know 2 or 3 pages a day. More if they're simpler pages, less if they're more complicated pages. Like if it's a big crazy splash page, like that might be 1 day or 2 days that's just spent on it. But for lots of like conversation or simple action scenes like that,
Yeah, yeah,
that can be done faster.
yeah. We were talking earlier about, well, I didn't really get into it, but about world building, about how much I like your world building and how your worlds feel lived in and how they feel coherent. Lot of technology, that is unique to your own world. Where does the hard part of that work come in? Is it in sort of the layout pencil stage, or is it from the writing and rewriting stage?
I think
Or
that depends on.
I
Yeah,
don't
because
I don't mean to be like that binary, but
I think that kind of depends on the story because sometimes I feel like it is emergent in the process. Like usually, like between script and final page is like trying to figure out how everything looks and feels. But then for like some projects I've done, um, because it's really fun for me, doing a lot of like preparatory drawing. So just doing tons of concept art to figure out how a story is going to feel, um, which is also a very fun way for me to like procrastinate from like if I'm stuck on some video game stuff that I'm not really enjoying, then I
right.
can technically I'm being productive by procrastinating by developing a story. Um, and like one thing that I do through the Kickstarters is offer these like basically like a sketch card. So for like $40, if you add $40 to the order, you get just like a drawing of my choice thrown into the book. Doesn't really matter what it is. And so lately, I've been kind of using that as an opportunity to, uh, just work on development for other story ideas that I have. So I can so now instead of being like, how am I going to carve out time to do this? It's like, well, I have to draw all these stupid sketch cards, so I might as well make every one of them a different like iteration of a robot or golem or alien or whatever the case may be that I'm like thinking about at that time. It's like a nice dedicated space to explore concepts, which
Yeah.
is again
How
like that's also like one of the funnest parts for me too is exhaustively looking at reference and drawing and to like cross-referencing things, looking up, trying to find the right weird uh, you know mid 20th century, turn of the century reference stuff that can feed back into the vibe that I've been enjoying trying to cultivate. Um, figuring out the exact right search term to get the right picture of the right 1930s Buddhist monk or Buddhist nun's habit, that kind of thing. Um,
right. When you're designing physical stuff in your worlds, is how often do you sort of nail it the first time for yourself, and how often are you like, yeah, not quite, rip it apart, do it again, no, not quite, rip it apart, do it again?
uh, I mean, I think it's like 30% of the time nailing it, especially if it gets just like a thing in the background of a page. I'll be like,
Yeah,
that's fine. But if it's like a
yeah,
main character, usually I'll sweat that for a while until I get
yeah,
the right vibe. And also too, a lot of the time I'll be like trying to figure out something and then go off on a research tangent and find the right reference of the right 1980s Soviet submersible robot and be like,
right,
okay, there's Father Stanley. Like that's
uh-huh,
gonna.
uh-huh, interesting. um How about when do you do your lettering? Are you doing your lettering in between pencil and ink? Are you blocking out your letters as you're doing your layouts? Like, there's a bunch of different ways to do it.
I generally do it like right. It's basically treated the same as inking and penciling. So like, I'll write it onto the page in the pencil stage, and then when I'm inking everything, do the final pass and the lettering then.
Yeah.
Which is generally good. Occasionally, if I'm rushing, maybe there'll be a legibility issue that someone will tell me that I have to fix later, which happens. But yeah, I'm a big fan of hand lettering your own stuff, just because I feel like it connects the lettering to the line work
Yeah.
in an organic way. Um, and also, it doesn't take me that much time because I'm not that meticulous about it. So if I was a more meticulous letterer and artist, I would probably do something different because it would be too annoying for me to letter it all.
Yeah.
Because I'm just kind of blasting it out.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I feel like the fluidity really works, and yeah, and there is, you've got a really organic line and a really organic lettering style that just works very much together. Who would you say your biggest influences are?
I think I would say the artist that got me the most into, because like I would say I grew up reading Tintin and Asterix, um, and Archie of all things, reading a ton of those three books. But the I think the artist that like unlocked my confidence in actually being able to draw stuff and not trying to like live up to like a clean Marvel house standard,
Yeah,
is the Italian guy GP, like GIPI.
yeah.
Because his book Notes for a War Story came out, I think, right around when I was finishing high school. I think it came out, and I got it right around there. And he has this wonderful, for the listener, he has this wonderful um, loose style that has moments of real like tightness and clarity, but also like he's got a wobbly line that he's not worried about keeping tight. Um, and seeing him tell like what felt like Notes from a War Story for me felt like a big important, you know, grown up real story when I read it, and I was like, you can do this looking kind of like sketchy and scratchy. Like
Yeah.
I don't have anything to worry about. I can make comics. I don't have to, because before I was looking at, I think specifically there was like a big glut of super shiny, highly like digitally rendered image comics that I was looking at the same time, which I was like, this is cool, but like I don't think I could produce work that looks like this, like at least not now. And then
Yeah.
reading GPL, I was like, oh, I don't have to. I can just draw in the way that I already draw, and go from there.
Yeah.
So again, that's also I would highly recommend that book if anybody listening has not read Notes for a War Story. It's one of my all-time fave comics.
Yeah. I was going to say I see a little. Oh my God! Why did I just blank on what I was about to say? Jose Munez. I
Oh
see
yeah.
a good amount of that in your line as well. And then there's also sort of that little bit of Mobius level in your design element.
Yeah. Well, and there's also the Argentine. Because it's funny, like when I first started working, I remember people being like, "Oh, you're really doing a Jacques Tardy thing here," and I was like, "I've never heard of that guy." Then I looked and I was like, "Okay, yeah, no, I can see where you get that." And actually, too, one of my all-time, I think after Notes for a War Story, my other all-time favorite comic is the giant Nausicaa manga. So
Mm-hmm.
actually, I would definitely say that like a contemporary, or not contemporary rather, but I mean he's contemporary. A current for me inspiration is like looking at Miyazaki's comics as well, because his comics
yeah.
are like loose and energetic and incredible.
Yeah.
And yeah, he's not too worried about any sort of house style. He's just drawing his style. He's drawing what he's interested in, and he's pulling it off beautifully. You know, even though now he's 90 years old or whatever, he's all of his giant body of work, even out of animation, is I don't know, it's very inspiring. I've got fan translations of like all the old comics of his that I can fan on my computer, and I know First Second just put out I think it's the Legend of Shuna, or they put it out last year. I remember I bought that for myself for my birthday, and I was very pleased about it. So that's another one I had, like I had a fan translation of that one. Then on a trip to Japan, I found a tiny, like this big, Japanese printed version of that book too, which also really inspired me to like try and get things printed smaller.
Yeah.
Just as I'm making these like tiny, basically like thinking of books as like these tiny, beautiful, perfect little objects. Yeah, I was very, very happy to get a copy of that in English.
Super nice. Super nice. All right. Inking. We haven't talked about inking. Faster than your penciling? Slower? Do you like inking?
I like inking, and I think it's probably about maybe a little longer, maybe a little
Uh-huh.
longer.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, not too much though. It's funny too because I feel like because I'm not doing these. Like if I was thinking of like your classic YA comic creator like you're referencing where you're doing it in these huge stages, because I'm doing these in like little bursts of like I'll ink like 3 to 7 pages, or rather I'll pencil that many pages and then I'll ink them. So it's like these little bursts. So they're not the two processes aren't like broken up enough for me to really be worrying as much about which is faster because they're like it's just like the holistic little unit of work that gets done piece at a time.
Sure. I was just trying to get a sense, right? Like I wasn't literally trying to pin you like this amount of time is that. I'm just because everybody works, and I've definitely heard people go, yeah, inking is just where I turn my brain off and I stop thinking and I just lay down ink, But other people are like, well, no, all the work's in the inking. That's how it looks the way it's supposed to look,
I'm kind of halfway in that tactic too, because like I will, depending on the page, like I will sometimes rush through pencils, and then once you're facing it with the pen in hand, you're like, oh, there's actually way more work here than past me really screwed me over now, and I got to spend way more time laying this down. But yeah, so I mean, that does happen. That definitely does happen. But
yeah,
if I feel like
then you hand the coloring off to Sergey, yeah.
Yeah, Sergey Nazarov. We've been working together since I think at least 2020.
Yeah.
Maybe a little. I think maybe a little before. And I met him through Artyom Trakhanov. Sergey is originally from Voronezh in central Russia, but he lives in Brazil now. So he left. He left basically. Yeah, like I think a year into the war. Conscientious objector. So I don't want to tell his story, but he's incredible to work with for me because like one of my real like focuses in making finished art is how lighting defines form. So when I was coloring my own stuff, it would always take me a long time because I would always have to I'd do all the shading first too, so being like, how is the light defining the form of these characters? And that was always a trouble for me, like working with colorists. Is if I was drawing something loose, it wouldn't necessarily be intuitively clear what the form was just for my drawing, which is like,
Sure.
not the greatest thing for a colorist. But Sergey has really like dialed in, like when he looks at some lumpy guy's face that I've sketched on the page, he knows like his brain immediately processes like the form in such a way that when he colors it, it it elevates the whole thing in a way
Yeah.
that I really appreciate. So I'm basically, I'm trying to keep him busy as long as I can until somebody wises up and steals him away from me.
Yeah.
Because he's very good, and he's also he's also a video game designer. So we're slowly trying to figure out a scheme for that as well. But
do you give him notes as to what you're looking for color, or do you just trust him all the way to do whatever he wants?
I usually have a couple. Like if there's something very specific, I will give him notes about it. But a lot of the time, I just trust him to go with his gut. So and it'll be like when there's notes, it's usually something that I forgot to tell him in the first place. So it's usually not. I try and get ahead of it and nail it down before he goes into it. But then often he'll be coloring and it'll be some little detail that I had not even thought to go ahead and talk to him about. But he's also like, he's very responsive, and he's good enough that I almost never, I never have any big change that needs to be done. Which is
Sure, I absolutely understand. How about the decision to color the balloons, the word balloons?
That was all him too, because I would have just left them, but he jumped into coloring the balloons, and I think it looks cool.
Yeah,
with a lot of his stuff, I just have grown to very deeply trust his judgment, which is nice.
Yeah,
very nice.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic, man. I like I said, I just think that this is just, it's such a good book. I mean, I like all your work, man, but I think this really worked for me on a lot of levels, and you should be very, very proud of the final product of this. I think.
Thanks, man. Yeah. Well, I'll show you real quick. I'm just gonna grab it. I'll mail you guys for future reference. Once I can rope someone into publishing a soft cover, but I do have the follow-up Refugium, which is currently has the shiny hardcover one.
Beautiful.
It hasn't shipped yet to all the backers. This is just like one of the comps, but I'll have to send one down to you guys just as thank you for buying GRIZ GROBUS, and hopefully I can entice you to one day, get a bunch more. Well, I mean, again, depending on the sales of the current GRIZ GROBUS book club, we'll make all those decisions in the future.
Yeah. Well, the beautiful thing about the book club is like those are all sold. Those 200 copies or whatever that we bought, those went to members, man, and
that's so cool. That's so cool.
So sometimes we'll send out the email. This is the book that we're about to send out, and maybe 5% will go, yeah, I don't think I'm feeling that book. Send me something else. But absolutely nobody threw back GRIZ GROBUS. Everybody was like, yeah, let's give that a try. So
Beautiful.
And it's the other thing is they're going mostly to civilians, right? Like people who are not necessarily walking into comic shops every month. Like this is the way they get their comics. Is whatever we're picking and doing the whole thing. And
that is so cool. And I love that you use the term civilians. It's one of the funnest things. Whenever I use the term similarly, just being like, people that aren't in the trenches, fans or creators alike, just normies. Awesome. There's nothing better than a normie buying a comic book. God bless them.
No, there's a clear difference between someone who's hardcore into it and someone who's a civilian. And the way that you sell to them is different. The way that you approach them is different. It's all. But I've been selling comics for 35 years, so this is like all just integrated into my brain in a way that I can't even explain otherwise. Also, fantastic book plate that you did. Here, let me show that to everybody at home. Isn't that nice? That's really nice. He drew little. He sketched on them too. That's
Yeah, everybody got a little sketch.
yeah. So if you're sitting at home and you want a copy of GRIZ GROBUS and you want it with a special signed book plate, we'll sell you one. There's a button there somewhere you can do it. Cool. All right. So let's do the wrap up here. Like the first question, the last question is the same. The last questions. The first one is the simple one. Is there something else you want to plug? Refugium, obviously. Is there anything else you're working on that you'd like people to know about?
I would just plug the currently I would just plug the Patreon just because I put new comics up on there every month. I just put up the first half of a new story called The Grand Tour, which is kind of like Habitat or GRIZ GROBUS. It's another kind of, after the collapse of galactic civilization, it's another distant little planet where, faced with a labor materials shortage, the colonists on this planet have gone a different route with sourcing their labor. So it's about a hermit who's been trying to avoid this kind of like evil genetic hierarchy that's been developing on this planet that he was a part of starting. His son finds him and ropes him back in, and I really enjoy having the Patreon as like a space to do these little short stories, and eventually they'll all be in print. But if you want the fresh squeezed Simon juice, that's the best place to get it.
Sounds fantastic.
Yeah, and I'll have pre-orders opened for Refugium in the next week, I think, basically. And then, so if you want to get a copy of Refugium, you'll be able to probably.
And I haven't looked at it, but I'm going to assume if people like GRIZ GROBUS, they're going to like Refugium. That's going to be my belief.
They will, and actually, I'll do a very rapid pitch on Refugium. It's the scribe character from GRIZ GROBUS, and she wakes up hungover on a riverboat going north into the timberlands below the polar ice sheet, where an unknown creature is eating goats at a logging camp. And so it's kind of like it's a riverboat journey mixed with what's the name of that movie where it's the lions hunting people at the railway camp. I can't remember the name. Something in the night, something like that.
Yeah.
Eyes in the Darkness, something like that. But it's and one of the big pitches for that book too is that I conscripted another collaborator, Jordan K. Walker, who is an oil painter who lives in Eugene, Oregon, or in that region. I got him to design a bunch of the biome and aliens for that book, because part of it is like spoilers, they find this pocket of pristine pre-colonization alien ecosystem, and so I got him to help me develop that, and he wrote and drew basically a guidebook to the native life of the planet that's intercut with the main story. Nice. And then I also conscripted a whole bunch of maniacs to, instead of doing pinups, I conscripted a bunch of people to design a ton of crazy aliens. So there's a gigantic section of just alien drawings in the book too. So
awesome.
If you like aliens, you'll love Refugium.
That sounds great. That sounds fantastic. Cool. All right. And then, so the very last question, as I mentioned, this is a series of interviews. You're something like our 250th interview, somewhere in that range. I'm not actually keeping exact count. But so part of what happens with this is that a lot of people who watch these shows, they want to make their own comics. They want to do their own thing. But they don't, they don't know how to start. They don't know that they're good enough. They don't know, all of those little internal voices things. So what would be, this is the final question, is what would be the piece of advice that you would give to someone who wants to make comics, is unsure of themselves or unsure how to start? It can be, a practical craft-oriented tip. It can be sort of an emotional one. It can be a spiritual one. Like, where's your head at for that person who's just like, I want to do it, but I don't know how, Simon. What do I do?
I feel like the advice that I always fall back on is just like starting small and manageable. Like doing small stories that you can actually complete and finish and share with people. Is in my mind the best way to start doing comics, because the urge for many people is to like dive into doing the 12,000 page epic that they've been thinking about since high school or whatever. And some people can't do that, and that's amazing. But it might be better to try and break off smaller chunks and build up to it. And also remember, there's tons of bad comics out there, so you can easily make a bad comic, and that's awesome, because then the next comic you make will probably be even better. So it's like just getting comics finished will, and not being afraid of putting out a turd every so often. I think that's really the thing.
No, that sounds great, man. I hear every word of that. Well, dude, thank you for taking your day and talking to us. I hope you had a little fun here.
This is wonderful. I like the giant digression into the nitty gritty of the comic book world, which is yeah. It was fun for me. It wasn't just the usual. It was an interesting range of questions. So thank you for having me.
Yeah, no, my pleasure. Give me a second. We're gonna put you off to the side. I'm gonna do a little bit of wrap up here, and then we'll wrap the show. Okay, so you sitting at home, hey, how you doing? Are you doing okay? Is everything all right? I do hope it is. If you're having a day and you wanna read something that's just gonna thrill you and excite you and make you think and make you feel, and has a lot of beautiful world building, may I recommend GROBUS to you? I mean, you've heard Simon talking. He's a smart guy. He gets his comics, and I mean, I can tell you this as a comics purveyor, this is the shit. You're gonna really, really like this. There's a bell thing, a link thing that you can do, and we'll put a URL on the screen that'll let you go to, not that URL, the other URL. That one, the Shopify one. There you go. You go there, you can get a copy, and it'll come with one of these cool signed book plates. So that's my that's my hardcore thing. But it is a really, really good book. You are gonna like it. Next month's Adult Graphic Novel Club, which will be the last Sunday of the month, we've got Brittle Joints by Maria Sweeney. This is a piece of, as they call it, graphic medicine, where she's talking about the condition that she suffers from, where she's got literally brittle joints, kind of like Mr. Glass from that movie, kind of a little bit. And yet she turns out this amazingly beautiful, like, painted work. She's really, really, really talented. And this is just it's really a great-hearted story. You're gonna love it. And so Maria's actually, because she's in the Bay Area, she's gonna be here in the store with us. And that'll be a live show. If you are in the Bay Area, you are invited to come down, be part of the studio audience. And that should be a really spectacular show. And then the next show that's coming up is our Kids Club, which is Rune. Ooh, look, it's shiny. Can you see the shine there? It's Rune, A Tale of a Thousand Faces by Carlos Sanchez. And this is a Kids Club book, but again, if you like kind of that European style of comics, and if you like GROBUS, I think you'll like this as well. This is a really good book. So I'm really looking forward to talking to Carlos about that next month. I got a couple of thank yous I got to make. I always got to make them. I want to thank Jordan, who's our producer. The stuff that none of you know about, but all the backstage stuff, I couldn't do the show without him. I want to thank Ben for running the show today here. All the bits and bobs. He does a great job. I want to thank my staff. I want to thank Zoe. I want to thank Kat. I want to thank Katie. And I want to thank our two munchkins, Chrissy and Max. They run the store in such a way that it allows me to have conversations with cartoonists. And that's the greatest gift that they could ever give me in the world, is that I get to do this, because I love this part so much. I mean, I love running a store too, but I gotta thank my staff for being them. I want to thank everybody who watches the show. I want to thank everyone who's a member of the club. It really makes a difference, and it allows us to keep doing this, and it allows the store itself to keep going. And above all else, I want to thank the cartoonists like Simon Roy right there. If it wasn't for you, buddy, I would have a store full of blank paper, which would not be very much fun. And I couldn't do what I do if it wasn't for you and all the people like you. So, thank you so much for making great comics.
Well, and yeah, vice versa. Without men of your ilk, who would sell our wares? Nobody.
It's a back and forth thing. It's a
symbiotic.
Exactly. Well, dude, again, thank you for your time. I really appreciate it. Thank everybody at home. We will talk to you next time. Thank you for watching this episode of the Graphic Novel of the Month Club. If you enjoyed what you were watching, please subscribe and hit that bell up in the top corner. If you enjoyed the books that we're talking about and the creators that we're talking to, every month we pick a brand new book. The staff votes on it. It's a program that helps keep our store alive, and we'd love to have you as a member. You'll get a new book every month. Just follow that URL at the bottom of the screen.